Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be doing my 2014 wrap-up as well as my 2015 New Year's resolutions. So I'm going to jump right in because I have a lot that I want to cover. First off, in terms of my New Year's resolutions, I'm just going to run through them really quick and talk about whether or not I achieved my goals. My first goal was to read 50 books in a year, which yeah, definitely had no problem with that. I don't really care about hitting certain numbers, but I just like to put 50 as my Goodreads challenge because I like to just see on the little sidebar on the main page what I'm reading or how I'm doing in terms of reading from year to year. So I just use 50 as the bar, and if I hit it, great. If I don't, that's fine. But this year I read 90 books. Even just taking out the graphic novels that I read this year, I still read more than I did last year, which is pretty fantastic. My second goal was to do the Mount TBR challenge and to read 36 books that qualified for Mount TBR. I definitely did not reach the goal for this one. Towards the end of the year, I always forget which books are my older books and which ones are not just books I bought at the beginning of the year. It all just starts to blend together. So I got really bad at just tracking which books are from my Mount TBR, but in general, I read a pretty decent amount that were from my older TBR stuff. My third New Year's resolution was to buy less books, and more specifically to get my TBR to under 100 books. And I was able to achieve that goal. Right now my unread books pile is at 90 books, which includes book haul that I will be showing next week. But basically I just wanted to get my TBR to under 100, which I definitely did. My next goal was to read one person of color author per month, and really my goal was to get my total to about 25%, which I did do, and I will be talking more about that when I do my stats part of this video. And my last goal was kind of my biggest fail in terms of my goals. I wanted to do one nonfiction book a month, but specifically I wanted to get my nonfiction up to 25%, which I didn't do, but again, more later. And then I wanted to read 2 presidential biographies this year, and I read nothing. So, need to work on that one. I do really want to read presidential biographies. I just need to work on prioritizing those in the upcoming year. I at least want to read, again, 2 if possible. Now to do the stats and pie charts, which is everyone's favorite part of these videos. In terms of gender breakdown, my gender for this year was pretty great. My goal is always to hit as close as possible to 50-50, and my percentages broke down to 56% female, 44% male, which I'm totally fine with. In terms of race, like I said, my goal was to hit 25% people of color, and mine is just a little bit above 26%, which is really good for me, or that I'm happy with, because I hit my goal earlier in the year. If you've been following these videos for a while, you may have seen that I was getting up to 30%. I wasn't paying as close of attention as I was the first 10 months of the year. These last 2 months I was kind of just reading whatever I possibly could finish because I was in such a slump that I wasn't really paying attention to the authors or nationalities of any of the authors that I was picking up. So it dropped back down to 26%, and I do have a goal for next year, but again, more on that later. Now in terms of the genres of the books that I read, in 2013 I read a lot of YA, and I read a lot of general fiction or literary fiction, contemporary fiction, that sort of thing. And so my goal for this year was just to diversify a little bit more. I wanted to up my nonfiction like I mentioned earlier, but one of the big things for 2014 is that I read a lot of graphic novels. So graphic novels jumped the biggest amount, I believe. My nonfiction number did increase a little bit. I think I went from about 11% to 13%, which is progress, but I'm hoping that'll increase even more. Everything else stayed relatively level, maybe plus or minus a percentage, which isn't significant in my point of view. And then some other just random stats about the books that I'm reading. In terms of the page numbers of the books that I read, the average page number was around 330 pages. I believe it's 332. Yeah, sounds about right since that's the average length of a novel. My shortest book was Down the Rabbit Hole, which I recently just read. It was only 70 pages. And my longest book was, of course, War and Peace. One thing that I was kind of unofficially tracking this year was the format of the books that I am reading. So this year the majority of the books that I read were in physical form. Paperback led the way, followed closely by hardback, and then I got a couple of ARCs this year, and then the rest was split up between audiobooks and ebooks. Now I'm tracking this or I'm documenting this in video form because I kind of want to see if this changes next year. I recently got a tablet, so I've been doing a little bit more reading on that. I got an Oyster account because in my quarterly box, one quarter, it came with a 2-month free subscription to Oyster. So I decided that since I got the tablet, I would activate that account and see how I like reading on my tablet, things like that. And then I'm also hoping that now that I'll have Audible for a full year, because I got Audible in the middle of last year, I want to see how many audiobooks I get through and things like that. So I'm mostly just documenting this for my own posterity and just to see how or if things change significantly in the upcoming year. And now for my 2015 goals. I don't have a lot of goals like last year, and I'm kind of just like building off the goals and what happened last year to make my New Year's resolutions. My first one is to have 50% people of color authors in this upcoming year. I'm a little bit nervous about this, but I feel like when I'm consciously paying attention, I shouldn't have that hard of a time. I also have like a giant list of books that I want to check out. I've kind of been thinking about this for a long time, especially with the past year and being more conscious, but I've kind of been more consciously making the list of books by authors either not from America or England, or you know, non-white authors, and then I'll probably be discovering more as the year continues and things like that. So I feel like I shouldn't have a problem with this. It's about like being conscious of it and making the choice of like, okay, I realize now that I've read like 2 white authors, and make sure I read 2 non-white authors or something along those lines. And slightly related to that is I'm hoping to read more books in translation. I feel like this will come slightly more naturally as I'm looking for more non-white authors, but that is also a thing I want to focus on. I'm going to be tracking a lot more information in terms of the books that I read every year. Like I have my spreadsheet, but I've added a couple more columns which includes nationality, so I want to try to branch out from the United States and England. And then as I mentioned earlier, I also want to finally hit that 25% nonfiction goal. I don't know if it'll happen. I would at least be happy with 20%, but 25% is the goal. Let's see if it'll happen. And then I'm going to be doing the Book Riot Read Harder challenge. I actually made the challenge into a little bingo sheet, and then I like put it into Word and made it look nice for me. The thing with the Read Harder challenge is that it gives you 24 different categories of books that you can try to read, and some of them will come very easily to me, like graphic novel or comic or a YA novel or a classic retelling. But then some of the other ones are going to be a little bit harder. There's one that's like a book by an author from an indigenous culture or about an indigenous culture, microhistory, which I do read microhistories, but I don't like consciously think like this is a microhistory, so I need to like look up what a microhistory is. I'm not going to be like making it a point of like, this month I'm going to read these 2 challenges or something like that. I feel like because some of these are going to come naturally to me, I'm just going to be sort of like marking them off as I go throughout the year, and maybe at about like after the first quarter or after the second quarter of the year, I'll like look at the bingo card and see if there's any that are missing so far and then make it a point. But I kind of just want to see if I can fill in these spaces naturally, or maybe I can use this if I'm looking for something different to check out. But yeah, I will have a link down below to the post that talks about the Read Harder challenge. I will also leave a link down below to the bingo card generator that I created, because it like saves the link, so you guys can all just make your own bingo cards, things like that. I just think it looks fun as a bingo card, even though we're not actually playing bingo, but I just like the way it looks on here. Hey guys, future Rincey here. I realized that I forgot to talk about one of my goals. So real quick, one of my goals is going to, again, reduce the amount of books that I own on my TBR, and so I'm going to be doing Project 10, which is from Jenny from Adultish Books. She did that. A lot of people are doing read 5 before I buy, but I feel like that isn't good enough for me. I want to read a lot less, or read a lot more from my TBR before I buy more books, because I have like 90 books that I have that are unread. The way I'm going to do Project 10, it has to be a book that I actually own, so either an ebook or a physical book that I own. Library books don't count unless it's a library book, like a library ebook that I own in physical copy, because I do that sometimes. So yes, it has to be a book that I own, and it's going to be Project 10. We'll see how this goes. After 10 books, we'll figure out what I want to do next, or we'll see how this goes. I don't know if I'm going to do like 10 books, buy a book, or what, but we'll see how the first 10 books go, and then we'll decide from here on out. And then I never really make New Year's resolutions in terms of I have to read these 12 books or something along those lines, but there are 2 books that I definitely want to conquer this year and that I think I will conquer. The first one is Lonesome Dove, which I mentioned in my last video. I'm going to be reading that with Steve from Steve Reads Books. We're actually starting that today since it's the new year, and we'll be reading it throughout the month of January, and I have no reason to believe that I won't finish that. The second one that I'm going to be reading is Moby-Dick. I like the idea of taking like one big or intimidating classic every year and conquering it. So this is that big intimidating classic this year. I think I'm going to read it again over the summer, similar to how I did it with War and Peace, maybe around like July or August. So if you guys are interested in reading Moby-Dick, which some of you guys said you were in the book haul where I showed this off, I will probably be reading it around July or August. I will let you guys know as those months come closer, and maybe we can do some sort of read along together. So yeah, those are my 2014 stats and my 2015 New Year's resolutions. If you guys have any similar resolutions or anything like that, feel free to leave a comment down below, or just let me know in general what your reading resolutions are for the year. One thing that I'm not going to be doing is I'm not going to be tracking the number of books that I read. I mean, I'm going to be like tracking it, but not like making sure I hit a certain number, because really at this point I don't need to read more, and I don't really care if I read a little bit less if I'm reading like more dense or more difficult books or things like that. For me, this year is all about creating more variety and more diversity in every sense of the term. So yeah, that's all I have for now. Thanks for watching.